Right, Amar, thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity. That was a bit of a high bar you set there in the introduction, so hoping not to disappoint. I already got a little feedback that maybe the visuals are trimmed a little. They are what they are right now, but I'm going to explain them in such a way that they're all going to make sense, so hang in there with me. We're talking about executive emotions today, and I don't think I've ever seen a registration number like this for a webcast that I've been a part of. So clearly people are interested in this idea of, gee, we have to sell to executives. We have to market and sell to executives. What needs to change? And IDC, the analyst firm, 80% of them said, they said 80% of decisions are being conducted and decided and signed off on by people with VP or higher level titles. So reaching executives is key, and everybody wants to know what's the difference or what do you need to do. I sometimes think people view executives like the Tin Man. One way to look at an executive is that they have no heart. They're sort of a non-human entity where they have no emotions involved in their decision making. They make just clear, rational, cold, calculating decisions, almost like a machine. Other people view executives like Tina Turner here in her song, What's Love Got to Do With It? Where, yeah, executives have emotions, but it's better not to use them. They check them at the door because emotions are the enemy. Emotions can lead you astray. And so at least executives want us to believe that. Hey, we're real people too. But when it comes to a decision, they say themselves, we are completely rational and logical. So what is the truth here? Well, I turned to my guy, Daniel Kahneman here. Now, he's not as commercially well-known, not a lot of commercial sex appeal to Daniel Kahneman, but if you see down on the right-hand side, he won a Nobel Prize in economics. What makes this significant is he was the first non-rational economist or neoclassical economist to win this award, the Nobel Prize. He's a social psychologist, but he won a Nobel Prize in economics. And so what did he say that turned the world of economics upside down and has any meaning to you today as a marketing or salesperson trying to create a message, tell a story to a buying executive? Well, real quickly, I'm going to tell you, this was the breakthrough. He called it prospect theory. And what he was able to measure, and then subsequently dozens and dozens of other similar experiments have confirmed, is that human beings are very emotional in their decision making and emotional in a very specific way. The first he called loss aversion. And what he was able to identify is that people will make a decision to make a change or choose to do something different 2 to 3 times more often and with 2 to 3 times stronger preference in order to avoid a loss versus acquire a gain. In other words, I choose to do this different thing more often because I'm trying to avoid some sort of loss versus trying to achieve some sort of promised gain. He then sort of doubled down on this and identified something called risk-seeking behavior. Here's what this means. Most deciders, you and me, human beings, are risk-averse. And the question became, if you're trying to sell something or convince somebody to do something different, that's really risky and most people are risk-averse. So the question is, when will they actually seek after risk as opposed to avoid risk? And he basically corroborated his loss aversion study by determining that people will seek risk more often to mitigate or avoid a loss than they will seek risk to get a gain. And I'm going to test this with you right now, real quickly. This is something you can do in your head. You can raise your hand in private. But if I were to give you this choice, you now have the opportunity for me to give you $75,000. Or there's a riskier option, but it's a high probability option of getting 33% more, an 80% chance of gaining $100,000. But like most offers, your results may vary. There's a 20% chance you're going to get nothing. Which of these two options do you choose? If you're like most people take the guarantee of $75,000. They're not too excited about taking a risk for some potential gain or some potential upside. Even though you're playing with house money here, you're not going to go home any poorer than when you came. Most people in a room, 80 to 90% raise their hand and say, I'd rather take the 75,000 than put it at risk to try and get more. In other words, risk seeking didn't take place here when the offer was acquiring more gain. But watch what happens when I give you the same offer and losses as part of the story. A certain loss of 75,000 or a highly probable 80% chance that you will lose significantly more, but a small chance that you will not lose anything. You're saying I have a chance. So the question now is, which do you choose? The risk of losing significantly more or the known loss of 75,000? Typically in the room when I ask this question, everybody all of a sudden becomes a riverboat gambler. They take the risky bet. This is a proof point, a personal experience right now of loss aversion and risk seeking. You sought risk to avoid loss. You were willing to do something different, take a chance in order to avoid loss, but not take a chance to acquire some gain, even though you were playing with house money. So the idea that an executive is all about the money, that they're telling you they're going to make a decision about the money, is now in question, because I think executives are human beings yet, and that they still potentially in the same position of prospect theory and loss aversion and risk seeking applying to them. But do we really know that? So we set out to do an experiment ourselves. In this case, we got our social psychologist partner, research partner, Dr. Zachary Tormala, to help us create an experiment. And he's a persuasion expert and a social psychologist, following on the heels of people like Daniel Kahneman. And we built a specific study that required us to recruit over 110 executives, VP or level higher titles, in multiple industries and multiple geographies. By day, Dr. Tormala is a Stanford University Graduate School business professor, and by night he does research and creates experiments with us in partnership. And this is the experiment that we did to these executives. Similar to what I just put you through, we created a condition for these 113 executives, and we split them into two groups. We gave them the premise that they were an auto manufacturer, and as an automobile manufacturer, they were coming upon some hard times and we're going to have to make some hard decisions about closing plants, and that there was risk of closing up to 3 plants and losing up to 6,000 jobs. And now there were really two options that you as an executive had at your disposal. One was to save 1 out of 3 plants and 2,000 jobs. There was a riskier option that gave you a 33% chance of saving all 3 plants and jobs, but a 66% chance that you'd actually save none of the plants. So look at that real closely again. I don't want the math to mess with anybody. Plan A is you get to save 1 out of the 3 plants and keep 2,000 jobs. Plan B is risky, but it gives you a 1/3 chance of saving every job and every plant. But it's risky because there's a 66% chance of saving none of them. Half of the executives heard this story and had these two choices. The second half here, sorry, I got the screen paused here. The second half of folks here saw this as a loss frame. Look on the right-hand side. What I want you to pay attention to is the math has not changed. The math has not changed, only the words have changed. The second half of the group saw Plan A as a loss statement. 2 out of 3 plants will be lost, along with 4,000 jobs if you choose Plan A. Again, look over at Plan A on the left-hand side and realize it's the exact same math, saving 1 out of 3 or losing 2 out of 3, but it was just positioned differently. Plan B is the same math on both sides. It's now just presented in a loss scenario. 66% chance of losing all 3 plants and jobs, and a 33% chance of losing none of the plants, in other words, keeping them. So again, compare side by side, don't get lost in the math. It's the exact same math on both sides, just a different way of wording and positioning it. So now the question really became, What choice will they make? But the thing that I really want you to pay attention to here is think of yourself and your solution in this case. Your solution is the risky bet. Your solution is the B in this scenario. When you ask customers to take a chance on you, to do something different than they're doing, to change maybe their vendor or their partner, or maybe change from the way they're doing it today to try the new and improved thing from you, you're asking them to do something different and no real guarantees of success. So your solution, when you present it to your customers, is viewed from their perspective as the risky bet. So this is why this study is really important. You are the plan B in this scenario. So the question really becomes, when and how can you get more people to choose the plan B, the risky bet? The group that saw the left-hand side, the status quo was framed as a gain, save 1 out of 3 plants. 74% of them chose that safer option. Only 26% could be persuaded to take the risk. And again, if you want people to take the risk, how do you increase their risk seeking? Well, look at this on the other side. When we reframed it as a loss, 45% were now willing to take a risk, with only 55% still sticking with the safer bet. In other words, you were able to see a more than 70, almost 80% increase in persuadability of executives just by changing the story, not the math. So now, if you just pause for a second and think about what happened here, the math was exactly the same. Rationally and logically, the numbers should have been the same on both sides because the math is exactly the same. But a huge change in people's willingness to take a risk or seek a risk simply because of the way the story was framed. This has tremendous impact on you as marketers and sellers as you think about how you're going to craft your story, how you're going to tell your story, how you're going to compare your solution to their current status quo, how you're going to compare it to maybe a competitive alternative. One of the most logical people of all time in terms of fictional characters was Mr. Spock. And whenever he saw human beings acting irrationally or illogically, he always came out with the same phrase, fascinating. I find this stuff terribly fascinating, and I'm hoping you do too. And here's how I want you to learn from it. The key to getting someone to think about your risky bet, choosing your solution, doing something different than they're doing today, is to help them see their current state as a potential loss. And that is how you frame and phrase the story. The math essentially didn't matter that much here. It wasn't rational. It wasn't logical. It was the story construct, the framing of the story, where you frame the current state as a loss to be avoided, where then the riskier alternative became more interesting and palatable. So when you build your stories tomorrow, you need to think of this in terms of how it affects the construct. In other words, what we're saying is prospect theory, the preference to avoid loss versus acquire gains, and the desire to seek risk in order to avoid that loss as opposed to seeking risk to get the gain is alive and well even at the executive level, and your stories must reflect that when you go in there. So even though they're telling you, I need an ROI, I need a TCO, I need this calculation, that calculation, there's something going on in their brains that has been shown to be true by social psychologists and prospect theory, like I just said, but has been validated in neuroscience. The analytical part of your brain, the part of the brain that contains the capacity for language, the part of the brain that tells you why it made a decision, is actually the part of the brain that simply justifies a decision. The functional MRI studies that have been done in the area of neuroscience have shown that the actual decision for a change, not the justification of that decision, takes place in the limbic system, the amygdala, the part of the brain that is actually emotional and intuitive and designed to help ensure your survival. It is not the rational logical part of the brain. The rational logical part of the brain, where language resides, is used to explain the decision, justify, and validate it, but it is not what moves somebody to actually make the choice. And the problem is it comes from a part of the brain where they can't explain that because it doesn't contain the capacity for language. Instead, that part of the brain craves what's called contrast. That part of the brain needs to see clear contrast in order to see value in taking the risk and choosing your risky bet, your solution. So what can you take from here? tomorrow, if you write a story that talks about your features and benefits, what makes them different, what makes them better, and the value the customer should receive, you're actually not portraying value in the way the customer perceives value, in the way they're willing to make a decision to make a change. You need contrast in your story for them to actually perceive value. Your story tomorrow needs to do a good job of clearly articulating the current state, this, if you will, perceived safer state, and make it unsafe. You have to frame that alternative, that choice, as a loss, and frame the future state that you're offering, the risky choice, as a resolution to that loss. And therein, in showing that contrast, you will communicate value. No contrast, no value. No contrast, no value story. No contrast, no sense of risk-seeking in order to avoid a loss. So this is the big opportunity, the big upside for everybody in telling that, in sharing this research with you. I've got a link right here, Amar, and I want to dialogue with you a little bit about these results and then maybe take some questions. But we have a deeper explanation of this research, a research brief, if you will, that people can get by going to this link. But let's talk about this. I find this Spock-like as fascinating. I'd love to get your reactions.
Absolutely. And if I can share a personal story, Tim, I don't think you know this. My mom just had eye surgery yesterday, and not to get personal on everyone, but it was very much framed on this style of decision making. So it hits home really well. And the reasons for us were very clear. If we don't do this, the doctor had to frame it the other way. Well, you're going to lose your eyesight. And that just got us all jumped up, and that's what caused it. So clearly there's a fascination that, and what you're saying, Tim, is that the amygdala, the back of that brain, that reptilian brain that we have, is causing human beings to be risk averse. Now, are there any strategies or tips that you can provide for sales leaders and sales professionals on how to frame and phrase our solutions better? I know you talked about this, but maybe you have a story or an example that you can share.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The natural technique and sort of the way value propositions have been declared to be built over, it seems like the last 20 years, is that you're supposed to identify your uniqueness, where you're different, where you're better, lean into that, and describe the value or benefit of that and what it means to the customer. And the expectation then is that the customer is able to intuit and infer why that's so much better. Like they have a really good grasp on their current situation or all the competitive alternatives and go, oh, I see it now. But the truth is we're giving buyers way too much credit. There's an assumption, a faulty assumption, that the buyer should know what they're up to and what they're doing and what their current state looks like. And the reality is they don't. That decision's been made and patched together over multiple decisions over multiple years with maybe multiple deciders and leaders kludged together like a Frankenstein monster. And they're living with something that, in fact, they don't have that good a grip on. And it's very hard for them to infer from your value proposition why it's so valuable, because the natural tendency for human beings, again, to be risk averse, is to react like, you know what, I think what you say is interesting, but I don't think it's that different from what I'm doing today. And so this lack of contrast means people are going to sort of make their decision in life easier. I don't want to move. I don't want to change. I'm risk averse. So I'm going to do everything in my power to try and show you and tell you why your recommendation, your new thing, is not that different from what I'm already doing, that there isn't actually enough contrast there for me to make a hard choice and change. And your job is to widen that contrast gap. And the key to widening that contrast gap is to, in other words, frame and then anchor their current state someplace where they readily see the things that are making that unsafe, the things they might be missing, whether it's a gap or deficiency or an opportunity they're missing, that therein is resolved by the alternative, albeit risky. And I think it's become sort of a phrase now that is becoming a little bit more common, that the pains I'm living with are painful, yes, but not as painful as the pain of change. And you have to make the pain of staying the same more painful than the pain of change. And that's what people are missing in their stories. They're simply missing this contrast, and they're fearful, ironically, of describing the current state in a loss aversion sort of way, because, you know, your brand says, we bring good things to life. You know, we want to be bringing butterfly wings and fairy dust and not little dark rain clouds. But the reality is, for humans to actually see the need to maybe change, they actually have to believe their status quo is no longer as tenable as they think it is.
Tim, this is so fascinating, because I'm actually starting to think there's so many areas of our lives that are impacted by this style of thinking. I mean, we're all going through the election cycle right now, and not to talk politics, but I guess this is the reason why negative attack ads are so used in the political circles, because they work. They appeal to that contrast nature that we have. So what a brilliant lesson to take from sales. Hey, folks, I'm going to invite everyone to just send your questions in using the question box. I'm sure Tim is going to help us answer them. Here's a great question from, and I hope, folks, you don't mind me using names, but here's a great question from Pamela. Pamela says, quote, "We are a no negative selling company. Tim, how do you balance showing current state is unsafe without negative selling or sounding like you are trying some, quote, bad sale tactic," end quote? Tim, I turn that to you.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think what it really comes down to is selling as an educator, almost examining the current state of the industry, the challenges, the threats, not as if the company's decision to do what they're doing is wrong or stupid. It was the smartest decision they could make at the time they made it. But by identifying the shifting trends and issues and sharing sort of the meaning of those, not just throwing a bunch of data points at a customer and hoping they can make sense of it, but actually help them make meaning and sense, and sort of take a shared view, as if you're not across the desk from them, but you're on the same side of the desk as them, looking at the industry, looking at the trends and issues, looking at the challenges they create, the opportunities they create, the competitive threats they create, and making sense of those together and reacting to them sort of together, but sharing hypothesis with them and getting their reactions to it. You're trying to make them smarter, not feel stupid. And I think what you're hoping to do is, and if you do this right, you're not negative selling, but you're actually showing them the surprises, the things around the corner they might have missed. It's funny, in the book previous to the one that we just did, it was called Conversations That Win the Complex Sale. We did some research with senior level executives, and they told us, it was very interesting, don't come in here asking a bunch of questions, trying to help me help you sell me. I expect that you see more people who look like me than I do, so tell me something I don't know. Because the things I do know haven't killed me yet. The things I don't know are the things that might. So there's an opportunity. Customers actually are interested in hearing about something they might be missing, but it is got to be nuanced. It's got to be presented as something insightful and educational, where here's what's being seen out there, here's how we triangulate the data points, and this is what it seems to expose to us. And here's what's really interesting we've seen in the research. When you come as an expert and you want to share that opinion, it's actually better to share that opinion and not be 100% certain of it. Leave just a little room for uncertainty and in that dialogue, but then together discuss it. So, even as I share these results today, I'm telling you that I can help you improve the ability to persuade people significantly if things are framed appropriately, but not 100% of the time. I mean, I showed you the data there, and this is just an interesting insight that has to be wrestled with, because you can have the opinion, won't do it, can't do it, but yet if all the science says that in some way you have to figure out how to work with it, there's just going to be an ongoing struggle to crack certain codes, to break the status quo bias, to take market share from competitors, and until somebody gets so fed up with your competitor they have to choose you. How are you going to go in there and dislodge, disrupt the status quo? You have to think about the science. But I think positioning it as making them smarter, not feel stupid, there's a way to do that. in a way that they're going to be receptive to, because they're telling us in our research they don't know what they don't know, and they will actually appreciate somebody doing that for them. But I think it has to be done well and done credibly. It can't sound like the traditional idea of FUD, because that seems inauthentic and makes you feel stupid and afraid, as opposed to helping you be smarter and being aware of the things that could get you before they do. So I hope that subtlety is self-explanatory. It's a finesse thing, and you got to work it, you got to practice it, you got to try to master it. But that's the idea.
Tim, great answer. And Demetrios and Mario, I hope that answered your questions as well. Quick question, and folks, and Tim, I'm going to see if you can stay on a little bit after our end time, but there are a lot of questions for you here. Let me just take one here from Ron. Ron is asking, in contrasting current state to future state, are there certain techniques that work better than others? So Tim, examples being stories, props, flowcharts, etc. Maybe you can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, so absolutely. So if you haven't gathered by even my slides, contrast is an inherently visual reference point, right? So the idea is contrast is visual, and that part of the brain, I'm going to go back to that visual for a second because I was showing you that part of the brain. I contrasted here. I talked about two parts of the brain. I compared them, and I help you now visually see what the difference is, and now you can start to decide and recognize what you must do different because you saw this. If this was done in bullet points, you might not have got it. If I had shown some sort of, maybe I could have done some sort of metaphorical image. There's a great book called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, and they talk about your brain being comprised of the elephant and the rider, the one who sits on top of the elephant. The elephant is your limbic system, the amygdala, the thing that's actually making things happen. The rider is the intelligent person sitting on the top who thinks it's in charge, because the elephant will go where the elephant wants to go. The rider just thinks they're in charge. And so I could have used a metaphor there like they did, the rider and the elephant, to help you think about how the brain actually works, how it actually makes decisions and where it goes. Is that primarily the elephant's in charge, and the elephant's going to go where the elephant wants to go and do what it wants to do. The rider just has some illusion that they've got mastery there. So I would say that good metaphors that help you take an abstract, complicated idea and now make it simple and concrete enough to understand and wrestle with, or specifically visuals that create the contrast, right? Even as I told this story between current state and future state, you now see the contrast. You now know what has to happen. That part of the brain that I was speaking to also doesn't contain really the capacity for language. It's why you can't really explain that emotion that caused you to decide, but you can try to justify it with some numbers later. Since it doesn't have the capacity for language and it requires contrast, it is an inherently visual learner and takes visual cues. So stories, metaphors, yes, but I think accompanied with contrasting visuals so that you can see the difference helps facilitate that decision.
Great answer. Hey, folks, some of you are pointing out that the link cvi.to/more insights is not working. What we're going to do is when we send you out the recording, we'll make sure that the link is up and you can link to it at that point. So my apologies for that.
That's my apologies. I put it up there. So yeah, Amar, that's what we'll do. We will put the link in the file. So do open your email follow up to this event with the link, because we will make sure there is an accurate, correct link in there if this is not working for you.
By the way, Mitch and Jen are saying it's working, team. What you have to do is put the http:// in front of it, and that should do the trick. Everyone is saying it is working. And one other question, folks. So we still have a few hundred of you online here. So let's take one more question. Andrea asks a question which is in two parts. So Andrea, apologies if I butcher this. It's not my intent. Andrea's question is, how do the other losses appeal to the decision side of the brain? CX, retention, CSAT, etc.
I want to make sure I actually understand that question. How do other losses?
Yeah, let's actually Andrea's question. Andrea, I think your question did not come in full. It came in two parts, so we apologize. Let me go to another one. We'll make it simple. Let's go to Pedro. Pedro says, in the case of a public traded company, the current state could be part of the discovery of how a company is doing and what their initiatives are to improve. Correct?
So yes and no. Yes, that will give you a frame from which to introduce then a potential challenge or threat. What happens is, if you restate something back to the customer they've already expressed, maybe publicly in the market, and you say, hey, it looks like this is a challenge to you, they're going to be like, congratulations, you're able to read. They already know that's the challenge. What they're trying to figure out is how to fix it. And so the real opportunity is to identify one layer below that, what the challenges, threats, and missed opportunities are that will help them achieve that outcome or avoid that challenge. And so that thing is for the soft landing. Hey, we're in the ballpark of something you care about. Now I want to talk about a few external factors and issues and challenges and maybe things you didn't see coming, or maybe things that are bigger and coming faster than you thought, that are taking aim at this thing you publicly said. And it's something you can help resolve. Because you got to take it one notch down from the big idea to introduce challenges and threats or missed opportunities that you can resolve. And those things have to be the interesting, maybe unconsidered need underneath that subset idea presented in a publicly traded company. So I hope that made sense, that the real interesting story, the thing the customer didn't see coming, is the thing that really moves them. And that's one tick below what they said publicly, because the thing they said publicly, they already know. So your job now is to add some value to that discussion, not just, I always say a trusted advisor figures out how to add value to that. Somebody who just repeats that is not a trusted advisor, they're a tape recorder. So you have to take it one level deeper, and that's where the story starts. But you use the thing you found as the soft landing to move into the story. So I hope that made sense in the limited time we have here. But it's great, it's important, but it's that first sort of entree soft landing, hey, you should keep talking to me because I'm going to say something relevant to you about something you care about, but now I got to tell you something you didn't know because this is the thing that could be holding you back that you didn't even realize.
Wonderful. Hey, folks, unfortunately, we are over time, and we are going to cap it off here. One just last comment, not a question, just a comment from Byron saying, folks, this works. If you want to see actually how well it works, view the Music Man movie. There's Trouble in River City and Professor Harold Hill. The Music Man shows the whole town how to make the change. It works. I definitely agree with Byron on that.
This is someone after my own heart because I refuse to use sports analogies. I'm more of a musical theater guy myself, so that person gets a gold star for that reference. Although he was a bit of a huckster, so but most excellent callback reference to old-time Broadway. Thank you for that.
Hey, Tim, thank you for your time. Folks, Tim and I are here. Connect with us on LinkedIn. We're here to help you. We're here to answer questions. We want to help guide you, whatever you need. So thanks for being here. We appreciate your time. The recording will be made available ASAP in the next couple of days, and we'll go from there. Tim, thanks once again.
Thanks, Amar. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, folks. Have a wonderful and positive day. Take care. Bye now.